Okay. A supreme vision within the gaze of man. Like an eagle freed from the cage of the past, this idea came to me. I noticed it in the sky of my contemplation. The way life works is that you either see a certain collective stance as if everything is collectively standing together, so all purposes are infused. That means we all have a part to play. Or you begin to see it as a sort of individual game. And it doesn't matter what happens at the end of the game, you just need to survive the best, have the most fun, and it becomes more of a self-directed sort of existence. There's a very nice quote by a man, by this Tibetan master, this sage, and his name is Nagarjuna, and he says, things drive their being and nature by mutual dependence and are nothing in themselves. And so what he is implying there is that we exist as a being in certain modes, in certain conditioned pathways we have decided to walk upon, you know? Regardless of how sophisticated the spectrum of the world is and how separate and, in some sense, dualistic we see things, it's as if an infinite thing exists through a mutual dependence to its opposite, which is space. Sorry guys, I just gotta fix something here. Pretty much this is the idea. A supreme vision within the gaze of man is a suggestion that you find a part of you that no longer is dependent on the past or the future for its definition, for its existence. So you realize you're born into many conditions, and so if you pay attention, actually your desires are experiencing moments of unconditional resources or something, you know. So the thing is, we are creatures where our minds are struggling with the condition and maneuvering through the condition. And it's very fascinating because we're not just given a physical world, a physical playground. We also have minds, which means that we are in some sense extracting meaning from what we see and how sophisticated, you know, our vision has been. And then as we extract meaning out of shape, we in some sense simulate a version of the world, and in our minds it has an infinite stretch. I playfully say that your body is kind of going forward in time, like from the past, you know, in the present and into the future. But, you know, this is very playful what I'm saying, but it's something I've observed, that it seems that the mind is going from the future to the present to the past. And what that means is that it's as if there is a sort of extra room in in our subtler planes of abstraction, where creativity has a sort of instantaneous godlike freedom, where you can think any idea into a thought, you can shape form into a sort of dynamic meaning. So you see, the thing is that many people who are going on the path of mysticism, enlightenment, and all this very, you know, I'm not going to speak bad of it, but it's like very marketed. You know, this marketed freedom that if you just do these right things, you will be in the right place. You know, I find that to be foolish. Life is too dynamic. It's as if you're on a wild horse. You're not sitting in a bus, and so you got to be conscious of this creature. You got to be conscious of the world that it's running on. You know, and so it's very fascinating that as someone, in some sense, looks at the concept of enlightenment, and instead of trying to seek a method, they realize it's about how able they are to change their speed of thought. So what that means is, how can I tell you, as I'm speaking right now, my thoughts have a certain momentum, and because I'm playful, like the way I can consider my have a relationship with thought is that it moves in a stream, as if no thought is my own, but when I jump into this river, I move with its flows. And so this is the interesting thing, right? This is what I'm kind of trying to get people to understand, that when you shift the speed of your contemplation, you know, you suddenly discover something. You discover a sort of natural secret you kept from yourself because you always thought you had to be something that you weren't. You know, that is in some sense the, you know, when Beethoven, in his last words, you know, on his deathbed was, "Applaud, my friends, the comedy is over." And I like his attitude, because it is very comedic that our whole social system and all its values are hovering on a rock in the middle of nowhere. So we're creatures in some sense. Each person is trying to be a king of their own identity. They're trying to be a certain unique individual, you know. And so this is the challenge of the world. That are we going to use language and conceptualization as tools, or are we using them as like fashion and clothing? You know, when I see people, I call it the belief wars. It's hilarious. You know, I always feel I'm watching from the sidelines, just like people who are claiming to be certain positions in a changing world. It's kind of humorous for me, you know, but it's needed because we have to expand the art of rhetoric. If you notice something, especially in 2019 and in 2018, you know, we had a lot of people come and speak. And so it seemed like that was a year where the minds of people had more of an inspiration to, you know, speak out. And it's very complex because it's as if like the more good we have, the less hardworking we become. The more bad we have, the more we have to work hard. But regardless, it is all about what the species decides to make the standard of living. And the standard of living is not just your income, your house. It is a state of being. It's a state of consideration. You know, you have, after billions of years, evolution has opened its eyes, you know, to a society with advanced technologies and communities. So what is it that we're waiting for? Because mysticism is not an easy thing. Everybody who just dismisses the concept of spirituality very early on, I find them, okay, this man is uncomfortable. That's simply it. Because spirituality is another word for a sort of experiential entrance into the unknown. But this experiential entrance into the unknown is not based on a sort of curiosity that kills cats. You know that idiom, curiosity killed the cat, you know? That's because the cat had an ego. You know, that's why the cat died, you know? But the whole notion is once your intensity, that's kind of what I mean by speed, the intensity of you wanting to have something in your subjective realm to be exactly like you want the world to abide by your mind rather than you, in some sense, trying to discover the universal mind, which in ancient mystical traditions there was the concept of the soul, but then there was the concept of the super soul. There was the Atman and the Parabrahman. And so these were, in some sense, symbols for a state of being where through non-dualistic intelligence reality functions as one organism. So your moment is no longer fragmented into different points, because every time I speak, let me tell you what's happening behind my eyes, as if my head was a camera. You know, to the best of my ability, I'm going to try this, of course, but so what I find happens with imagination is that, let's say, whoever I think I am now, I believe behind my eyes there's like this all-seeing sort of witness, and so there's a part of me that is seeing every memory, kind of like when I speak to you and let's say I tell you an experience I had in my childhood. You know, for example, I dug the dirt of a backyard of, like, you know, my grandmother's house when I was like super young, you know, and I suddenly found a ring, like it was very like unique, you know. And so, for example, when I tell you that, as I'm saying it, there is a part of me that is reliving it. And when I say reliving it, it's more like the attention goes to what has been experienced, because what has been experienced is accessible through memory. So our relationship with our memory is based on our relationship with time, and our relationship with time is based on our relationship with who we think we are to even assume the world in a certain position. So supreme vision within the gaze of man becomes the curiosity to wonder what is looking throughout my eyes, and is this shaped? Is this unshaped? Is this speakable, unspeakable? Is it visible, invisible? And so to Mr. Within's, stretch of the imagination, what I have concluded is that you find yourself as a spontaneous moment of attention. That means when you go within, you come to a sort of neutral being, as if at the end of the day, we're not people, we're just attention in a moment of being, an attention being a moment. You know, that's the most poetic way, I guess I could say it. So what I'm telling you is our new awareness of intelligence that is not invisible updates are visible. And so what I mean by that is that there's this very interesting saying I heard recently. It's like this Arabic saying that says, if you want to do something, do it with your hands. If you can't do it with your hands, do it with your words. If you can't do it with your words, do it with your heart. So what that means is, if you want to change something, you know, first approach is direct. Directly headed on, you know, challenge the day and try to solve it. If you can't directly change something, try to change it with words. You know, and we often find ourselves in this situation when there's a friend, you know, there's like a brother, sister, you know, some family or friend right there, you know, someone you care about. And you can't make them decide, you can't decide for them, but you use your words to convey a certain landscape of new consideration for them. You know, and so what happens is that if that fails, then you have to change your heart, and so you accept. You just accept the moment and you live on, and you look at the sky and the cosmos and you say, wow, after all this time, these creatures have opened their eyes and we're all here for a little while, and we're all stuck in our certain social settings and ways of being and whatever. And so it's one of these things that when I look at it, it's just like, okay, it's honestly like a dream. Life is like a dream, but it is not like a dream like directly. It is indirectly like a dream, because your dream is like you sleep and then you see something, you wake up, right? So it's similar, where it's as if kind of like we have no idea how we got here, and you know, kind of where we're going, kind of situation. So life does have a certain quality of the dream, because a lot of it is kept by the unknown, and this is really the great challenge of future generations. I hope my voice echoes for a long time, in the ears of the new generations of kids that are being born, that you must understand nobody knows anything. Listen to what I'm saying playfully, okay? Nobody knows anything, and every bit of knowledge is kept in the unknown, has its roots in the unknown. And once you understand this, you go to a moment where it's kind of like you experience the heavenly bliss of novelty. A moment that is no longer defined by the past. A moment where there's no longer a past, future, or present, because it has never been a concept. It has never been a thought. You have been too trapped in your mind, and now you must, fly like that eagle beyond the cage. Beyond the cage of self-limitation, because you got to think about it, right? There's so many people in this life you may meet who may dishonor you or honor you. And you're going to see that if you think you are a certain way, you will miss out on all the other ways you could have been. Lao Tzu has this very nice quote. He says, you must let go of who you are now to be who you're meant to. Something like that, And the idea is very valuable, because what it means is that we can let go of our thought. And so here's the interesting thing. Right now, like for example, you're paying attention to my talk, you're paying attention to my words, and you're paying attention to how my words are being instantaneous generation of meaning for you as you're listening to it, right? So in that instantaneity, you will suddenly notice there's an observer. There's an observer that has nothing to do with the activity, as if deep within space is the intelligence that has allowed matter to sprout. And so what I mean by this is that this is the sophistication of our intelligence, that we are spontaneously world creators, and it is how accurate our world behind our eyes is compared to, or let me say it like this, it's based, your success in this life is based on how clearly you see what life is. And it has a certain physical dimension to it, and that physical dimension is being it's functioning in accordance to natural laws. So you cannot avoid nature. You cannot avoid the natural force of community embedded in all evolutionary creatures, because the tribe survives, and our children will open their eyes, And so this is the fascinating thing. I remember hearing this immense mystical concept. It was showing the significance of the family, and so it was as if like it was this saying where, I don't know honestly where I heard it. I think it's some YouTube video. But what it was is that like the guy was saying, oh, it's as if like the past is speaking to the future and the future is listening to the past, right? And so the past says to the future, we will live for you and we will die for you. But because we have lived for you, give us eternal life. As if this was that message in a bottle we sent into, our future. And what it meant is that when the future gains the ability to change its mind, it is all about tuning in a sort of world-generating pattern that's cosmically happening. It's a sort of wave frequency satellite kind of thing where your mind is actually like a satellite. And some people are going to be like, okay, Mr.Within, calm down. But I'll be honest, like it receives and it expresses simultaneously, kind of suggesting that based on your attention and how it chooses to have boundaries, you suggest how much the world can engage with you, and hence you suggest how far the ego will be sculpted. Because anytime I've done something, I remember when I play football, I'm a footballer. When I give this talk, I'm a speaker. When I'm, in my bed at night, I'm a sleeper. So what I'm telling you is that that's the thing. We are taking definition out of the moment of our attention and based on its biological kind of interface, Or let's say it's like we are this biological computer where its interface, let us say, or its program, is imagination. And imagination is boundless ability for an attention within an attention, just like two mirrors in front of one another, to project empty infinities. What that means is it's an infinite dream. It's a simulation, but it's empty. Right? So that's one thing that, like, in life people have to acknowledge, a sort of sudden emptiness of meaning. Because what is death? Death is like everything breaks, right? Or the four elements that are keeping your material existence in some sense dissolve and you experience it. For me, I find that people's lives are hijacked by personalities. And personalities are desires and certain urges of a certain future multi-dimensional success, where in multiple things the person has succeeded and now he can rest. Like, that is, you know, ridiculous. We have to first realize, what do we value as a species? Let us truly find this supreme vision within the gaze of man, because it is in reach. And what that means is that the supreme vision can be said to be a sort of collectively considering, a sort of all-inclusive freedom, but a freedom that has organization. So instead of seeing chaos and darkness and evil and all this stuff, let us make freedom chaos, and let us seek the order, which is going to be that intelligence beyond freedom that governs it. And when I say governs it, I'm not talking about some supernatural show. What I'm talking about is that you take responsibility not as a person in a moment, but as a moment of being, for being all that is within your moment of being. Your mind is a sort of spherical intelligence around your body. Many people don't see it. They think that people have auras. No, you're a sort of sphere. You're a sphere of mind. Wow. Life can be very fascinating once conceptual territory is stepped into. That means we can play with the notion of the past, we can play with the notion of the future, we can play with the notion of the present. But the present seems to have the greatest access, the present moment of being, to what is directly here, what is clearly here. So this is why in all these mystical traditions, the dude's just like, the guy's like, yo man, what should I do? How should I get enlightened? And the dude's like, yo man, just be here. You know, and just realize you're being now. You're being all that you can be as a moment. And you must learn to accept this, because many people feel they need to have a certain sacrifice to be valued. No, we are taking the greatest sacrifice, the greatest risk, and that is to exist. And if we take a Buddhic approach, that means we're taking a great risk of existing in a sort of cycle of existence, in a sort of multidimensional landscape of formed and formless creatures. Creatures that in some sense are thoughts in the realm of, how can I tell you? The mind is like, it is like water. It can, like how Bruce Lee says, you know, be like water, my friend. When he says that, he says, have a certain state of being where you can be super gentle, just like how water in a stream flows gracefully. Or you can be super intense in times of need, like how water crashes like a waterfall. And so there's many ways of existence, but the supreme vision comes down to a sort of abiding by, like in your mind, you are living in a better world. And so because you're living in a better world, regardless of what karma occurs, regardless of what happens, you see that you're being pulled by where you see yourself. So inspiration, writer's block, all this comes from where you see yourself. And people are afraid to think about things deeply. This was a shock for me, because there's no such thing. There is no such thing. It's all about attention, and most people can't have their attention on an idea for long. I want to speak about a sort of issue that one comes, not an issue, let's say, a sort of obstacle. This obstacle is the obstacle of an existential confrontation, where at some point in your story of life and the character you're being throughout the day, based on your energy levels and how your attention is just inspired to move through the day, you will suddenly try to, in a snapshot way, wonder what it all means. And when I say not wonder what it all means in a way where, like, it's a sort of nostalgic pain, in in a way where you let go of every thought you ever had to experience a new, fresh moment. And once you do, you see the world clearly, you're present, and the world communicates back once you're being your natural self. That's it. You just abide by your true nature. And in doing so, the world kind of moves through you and moves through your mind as if it is your mind, but not in a way where you're an idea scared of fading. In a way where you see the union of God and man in one moment, which is what this mystic Meister Eckhart kind of very beautifully described. He said, when the same eyes that I see God are the same eyes that God sees me. So, in other words, the same way knowledge approaches the unknown is the same way unknown approaches knowledge, because that's how the eyes are open. That's how the world is kept. It is kept by an instant of consideration. But if we put aside all our beliefs and all our ideology, where do we find ourselves? We find ourselves in an emptiness. And in the vastness of this emptiness, we realize it is too big to know and we're too small to contain. As if this cup that was trying to hold everything was actually dropped into an ocean. And so what it means is that the cup realizes that at some point it has to consider its transparency. It's sort of the shape that you're holding life, and it has a value for you. Inevitably it will change, and when it changes you will have to confront the unknown. So those people who realize it's actually more uncomfortable to be uncomfortable when there's greater things happening. This is the thing about life. When a system, an economical system, prevents imagination and creativity and does not put the highest value on uh, idea generation, it is in some sense making the world robots before it builds robots. And so that's the situation. That's the honest situation. The world is becoming a machine, not realizing it was given paradise as a moment of being. I found this random book. I'm going to read something from it. The title of the book is The Supreme Bliss of Nibbana, Nibbana. I'm glad it's not banana, like nip banana. All right, let's see this. All right. This is page 170. It says, he understands properly, I think, so here, take it in the context of a sort of seeker, any sort of spiritual seeker or seeker of the unknown or whatever you like to call it. So here's the quote. He says, he understands properly the nose, he understands properly smell, and he understands properly the bondage, owing to the allure with passion and desire that arises dependent on these two. He understands properly how the bondage, owing to the allure with passion and desire that has not yet arisen, comes to arise due to unwise reflection. He understands properly how the bondage, owing to the allure with passion and desire that has now arisen, gets eradicated by seeing things as they really are through right understanding. He understands properly how that bondage that has now been eradicated through right understanding will in future no longer arise. So I think kind of like the vibe I get from this is that, dear listeners, we're just people who are living in a physical world and a sort of subjective world. We're living in our ideas of the world also. The world is being colored by the ideas we have on it. And so at the end of the day, we're just a moment of attention. And in the pureness of that moment of attention, you feel first guilty, you feel undeserving, you feel as if chained, imprisoned, and then suddenly you go into this neutrality where you see why. Why was my mind allowed to generate an incapable vision of myself when a capable vision could have always been there? And that's where you find your inspiration, because you find the passion towards a new life, and hence you have found a purpose beyond new eyes. You become the supreme vision within the gates of man. So thanks for listening, guys. It shows here there's 2 people watching. If you guys have any questions on anything, you guys can share it, and it's all good. Actually, there was let me see, maybe I could do something here that okay. So I'm actually, until anybody has a question or they want to ask something, there was some question somebody asked in the comment section of another talk. So I'm going to read his comment. Alchemical Heart 9 hours ago said, I seek wisdom and have a strong urge to challenge you to obtain it, but fear frustrating you inadvertently. It's all good, man. Don't fear anything. I'll start with the most fun. So he continues. He says, I'll start with the most fundamental obstacle that I face. So much contemplation relies on the existence of God or a universal consciousness. What might a mystic see should he contemplate the path that an atheist must follow to touch fingertips with God? Okay, interesting. So, I'm not sure if you mean here atheist or theist, but because I don't believe an atheist. Oh, okay, I guess you're kind of suggesting the relationship of thought. So here, this is how I approach it. You see, we gotta say it comes to the first cause argument in philosophy, right? Where we gotta say, was there something or not? Did something turn on the engine to all existence having a certain design and a certain movement and all natural laws being in place? So because we are alive, we tend to want to see the source of our existence also being alive, being something even more alive than what we think, you know? And so I remember in certain religious texts, as if it suggests that God has no partner. God has no person can shape God in their mind, you know? Something like that, right? So this is the situation where we say, okay, so what does that mean? It's like a shapeless source, a shapeless on button, you know? And its intelligence is based on what we see that's our evidence, you know? So I agree with you. Yeah, a lot of contemplation relies on a sort of accepting that there is something there to contemplate in the first place, you know? And so that in a sort of macrocosmic way is this universal consciousness or the word of God. So then you say, what might a mystic see? So that's your first question. And then you say, should he contemplate the path that an atheist must follow to touch fingertips with God? Okay. So what might a mystic see? You see, that's a fascinating question, because a mystic is the whole point of it here. I'll just define it to you in a simple statement. It's a lover of the unknown. And in order to love something, you got to be authentic, because then you're not even loving what you're doing if you're not yourself, right? So a mystic is that being who's kind of looked at a lot of knowledge in this life and different things he knows, and he's like, okay, what do I not know? And it's the unknown. So you're paying attention to the unknown. So that means you have less expectations of what you see in your mind to actually happen. So you're kind of becoming preferenceless. So a mystic doesn't really have a preference. If you have a preference, that means you still want things to be like how you want them, you know? Right? So for me, the mystical experience is non-dualistic. So that means it's as if there's who is there to want something, you know? And it's more of like you're becoming an observer that is no longer bound by an object or a subject, you know? So that's kind of the mystic, you know? So what might a mystic see? Actually, the mystic will see its eyes in the unknown. That means it's like who's looking through your eyes is the unknown. It's a vast unknown, you know? And you say, should he contemplate the path that an atheist must follow to touch fingertips with God? Okay, so an atheist, I think, doesn't want to touch fingertips with God. But a theist, if you meant a theist here, so you're kind of saying, should you trust the religious kind of upbringing you had and how you were more innocent as a child, so it felt like more correct, you know? Because I've experienced that myself. Let me tell you, because you're not just a thought, we can't just say a statement and conclude that's the right thing, right? To touch fingertips with God, well, guess what? It's your understanding of God that needs to shift. And when you try to look at the concept of God, that's what I'm telling you. It's an unknown. It's an unknown where all knowledge is being moved through it. Do you see? So what that means is, as long as you are the limitation, you cannot touch the limitless. As long as you feel it has to be a certain simulation of imagery that you would be like accept, it doesn't work that way. The proof for a thought is external. The proof for an experiencer is the experience, and the experience thought is only a certain ratio of it, a certain portion of it, a certain percentage of it. There's so much more to the world than our thoughts on it, than what we think, than what we see. But this doesn't mean we devalue what we see. We revalue it through a new framework, that because our mind could see a better path, why not walk? Why not walk towards the greatness that's behind, every breath of a living being to continue? Listen, these Mr. Within talks are they're things that I kind of do when I'm in a certain contemplative mood. I tend to be a lot in a contemplative mood because in my mind I've kind of thrown like an impossible spear at the sky, You know, and what I mean by that is that I've kind of gone into a mode of self-inquiry where my self-inquiry was first trying to find truth, then trying to accept that there is truth, and then realizing that the truth that I will find is not going to be like you will like your ego never finds truth. It dies before it. So what I mean by that, it's kind of like how these ancient poets suggested. It's like the moth and the candle flame. So when the moth, I was speaking about it the other night, like when the moth goes closer to truth, it feels warmer. It sees more beauty, more divine elegance, more divine will, more miracles. But when it truly goes to truth, its wings will burn and it will fall and it will die and it will wonder what it all meant. And what I mean by that is that your ego will in some sense burn in the clarity of a new self that is no longer bound by thought. Do you know how relieving that is? Oh my God, the first time that happened to me, realizing I'm not a thought, it was like, it was more divine than anything I could ask, because it was a realization. I saw something I thought I couldn't have. And what I saw was not an image, it was a movement of the world, because seldom I am occupied by physicality as the road. What I mean by that is that if I see people behave, I'm not always paying attention to, okay, what kind of person is that? What kind of person is that guy? And how is their behavior happening? And what are the thoughts? Or like, I don't rationalize like a computer. For me, I just watch without a preference, and I'm like, how is the soul of the moment moving all that I am aware of? It is a sort of relationship with yourself you establish once realizing you're not your thoughts, and then realizing you're not your emotions. What that means is some people, like, your ego can break, but still there's a vast, like, accumulation of memories of the past where still a part of your attention is stuck in. To truly come into the present moment is not just like you physically sit on a bench, you're like, okay, I'm in the present moment waiting for the bus, waiting for the enlightenment bus, It's not one of those things. It's one of those things where you realize, in order for you to just be there, sit still and silently and present, it's like, how can I tell you? You don't want an enlightenment teaching. You don't want an enlightenment teaching because there's something better than that you can gain, which is you, in some sense, sitting still and silent and allowing your true nature to reveal something, as if like something nobody told you since you were a kid is you are your greatest teacher, and your moment within it holds the cosmos. The pillars of civilization are kept in the attention to civilization and to a better one. Our personalities are based on, in some sense, a sort of linguistic wheel that's kind of like a file cabinet. I don't know how to say it. You must free yourself from bodies that are not yours, from forms that are not part of your life form. You must embrace nature, but not try to get lost in it. You must hug trees with your mind by shifting your universal perspective that nature demands graceful passage. I didn't like it in this existence when I realized intelligence could be cruel. Great intelligence could be cruel. Great minds could choose to hold the sword instead of the shield that is defending us from extinction, I guess a warrior race requires a shield and a sword. So, my friend, if you have a thought on God, let it just be the moment before you have thoughts. And be present, and you will realize your name even suggests it. Your name says alchemical heart. So alchemy is a sort of transformation, a sort of lead turning into gold, and the way it turns it is that its nature changes. So the sort of mystical approach to alchemy is your nature changing, and your nature changes into a new view. And it happens all the time, but people don't appreciate it. I celebrate every time I see something profound about the world that I didn't see before, and I just like clap for the moment as if like finally I'm attending the show, because we have to care for existence, because it is like something that happens after billions of years. You know what I mean? It's too rare to let go. We can't just become all blind robots and violent animals. Like, it's like there's something much cooler than that can happen, you know? So rather than occupying yourself as a theist in trying to be with God, or as an atheist to try to disprove God, just stop thinking about God. Your moment is the moment where all value is given. You are the value giver to every objection and agreement, to every path put forth. Your eyes have shaped it into your world of meaning. And it's very interesting. I can prove this to you. When someone reads a book, that's just ink on a page. Your mind is giving value, extracting value. So once you realize this, you become responsible for your mind, and that means being willing to see its emptiness and its fullness. So best advice is find your true nature, and the best way to find it is by realizing you're already being it. Hope this helps, Alchemical Heart. I guess this is it for the live stream. And there's these words I'm going to share right now that have come to me and that have been my inspiration. Anytime I fail, this is the kind of a thought my mind goes to. And it's this: rise, mankind, rise. To see your species succeed rather than to just see yourself hide in a you know, big house. That's fascinating. That's exciting. People's excitement is being directed to the wrong things rather than to the solutions. It's being directed to the problems. A supreme vision within the gaze of man is in reach. Seldom it is said. It must be reached from within. Much blessings and namaste.